Sally that girl in the kitchen. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally that girl in the kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make a tapada de espinaca y queso. Yes, a spinach and cheese borreca pie. If you're not familiar with tapada or borreca, I'll give you a little explanation. Borrecas are a very typical Sephardic-Turkish dish, and they are homemade dough filled with spinach and cheese, or potato and cheese, or meat, or many different fillings. But a borreca is usually shaped one by one. But a tapada takes the same delicious dough and bakes it into a pie, just to make the process a little bit easier and not have to go through the trouble of shaping these one by one. But the result is just as amazing. In this case, I'm going to be stuffing my tapada with spinach and cheese, and it is ridiculously good. It is so tasty, and the crust is flaky and perfect. You're going to love it. So let's not wait another second, and let's get started. For the dough part of today's recipe, you will need 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a cup of vegetable oil, 3/4 of a cup of warm water, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1 egg for an egg wash, and some non-stick cooking spray. And for the filling part of today's recipe, you will need 2 pounds of frozen spinach thawed, 1 pound of feta cheese crumbled, 3 cups of shredded Parmesan cheese. If you're buying your Parmesan cheese already shredded in bags, you need 12 ounces, and 6 large eggs. You will also need a large fork or a dough whisk or whisk, a large spoon such as a serving spoon, a knife, some measuring spoons, some measuring cups. I use a 9 by 13 glass Pyrex, but any similarly sized baking dish will do. You'll need some wet measuring cups, a bowl to crumble your feta in, a large bowl for your spinach, another large bowl to make your dough with either a lid or some plastic wrap to cover it, a small bowl with a fork, and another small bowl with a fork and a pastry brush, a rolling pin, some wax paper, and some oven mitts. So now that we have all of our ingredients and tools together, let's get started. So the first thing I like to do is the night before I'm going to prepare this tapada de espinaca y queso, I pull my frozen spinach out of the freezer and I just set it in my sink to let it thaw overnight. I find that this is the easiest method to thaw my spinach, but of course you can thaw it on the stove or you can thaw it in your microwave, however works best for you, but I really like this method. So pull out your spinach, just leave it in the sink, and then that way it'll be ready to be squeezed out the next morning. So it is now the next morning and my spinach is ready to be squeezed. It's been thawing overnight, so it's no longer frozen, but you will notice that of course it's released a lot of water as it thaws. So it's really important that you grab your spinach in your hands, bunch by bunch, as I'm doing here, and you squeeze out every last drop of water. You do not want a runny tapada de espinaca y queso, plus you don't want that excess water ruining that flaky dough that's going to be surrounding this delicious filling. So it's really important that you squeeze out every last drop. So once you see that you've squeezed your spinach and there's no more water coming out when you squeeze it tightly, then just grab that piece and then just loosen it, just kind of break it apart, because of course squeezing it is going to make the spinach clump up together. So then as you add it to your bowl, you just want to loosen those leaves and break them apart. And then you're just going to repeat the process over and over. You're just going to grab another bunch and you're going to squeeze it again in your hands, and then you're going to just add it to the bowl. So this is what your spinach should look like once you've squeezed all of the water out of it. And then of course, just loosen up the pieces and make sure that they're nice and loose and there's not any big clumps of spinach. And now your spinach is ready. So the next thing you want to do is add your flour to the bowl. Now, add all of your flour, and then you're going to grab your salt and measure it out, and then you're going to just add that right on top of your flour. And then you want to grab your large fork or your dough whisk, and you just want to combine that salt with the flour. You just want to mix it really well in order to incorporate the salt amongst the flour. Now, why do I use a large fork? Well, because my grandmother used a large fork and she taught my mom to make it using a large fork. So that's the way my mom taught me how to make it. But of course, you can use whatever tool you prefer working with. Now, the next step is to measure out your oil and to add it to the flour. Now, it's important that you incorporate this oil using that same tool, but what you're going to notice is that you're going to start to form pebbles. The combination of the oil with that flour and salt will form these pebbles with the flour, and what you want to do is make sure that there's no dry flour left in the bowl once you combine your oil with the flour. Now, once you mix enough, if you feel that your flour is still looking slightly dry and there's too many white dry areas, then you may drizzle a little more oil into the mixture, but don't do so until you've used the side of your fork to break up any clumps, and you just continue to stir until all of that flour is absorbed. You will be surprised that the more you stir, it will absorb and become pebbles. Now, as I said, once you've stirred plenty, if you feel like it's a little dry, then yes, you may add another drizzle of oil if you deem necessary. But if you're patient and you continue to stir, you may not need it at all. But don't be afraid to add another touch if you feel that your mixture is too dry. Now, once you've incorporated all of the oil and you don't see any white flour left, this is what your mixture should look like. You see the pebbles I was referring to? And then once you get to that stage, you measure out your water and you want to take it over to your microwave and you want to warm it up. You do want it hot, not boiling, but you do want it hot. So depending on the strength of your microwave, you might want to go with a full minute. You do definitely want your water to be a bit hot. And then you're going to add it right on top of this mixture, and you're going to use your same tool and you are going to combine the water with the rest of the ingredients. And you just use the same method you were using before. Just stir and go from under over, and then just turn your bowl as you go. You see how I take my fork under the mixture, then just bring it over, and I slightly turn my bowl as I work, and I just start to really incorporate that water into the mixture. Now, once you feel that your dough is starting to come together and it's becoming a little more difficult to work with your tool, then instead just clean your tool off and you're going to switch to working with your hands. So what you want to do is just grab the mixture and then just gently bring it together. You're just forming a dough ball. You don't necessarily need to knead it. You just want to use the dough to pick up any remnants that have stayed behind, anything that has clung to the bowl. You'll be able to pick up and attract with the dough itself. So once you've cleaned off the bowl, then just kind of squeeze your dough a little bit and just make sure that all the ingredients are incorporated. And you're gonna notice it's got a really nice soft texture. It's just a really beautiful dough to work with. And then just check it and make sure there's no dry clumps and it's nice and smooth. And then once you feel that your dough has come together, then what you want to do is you just want to shape it into a ball, because we are going to be making a top and a bottom for our tapada. And so we're going to be cutting that ball into 2 parts. So just try to make it into a nice ball so that once it's rested, then we can just cut that ball down the middle. So once you've shaped your dough into a ball, then just place it right back into your bowl. And if your bowl has a lid, then just go ahead and cover it. If it does not have a lid, then just grab some plastic wrap and then just wrap it tightly over your bowl in order to keep your dough nice and moist, and let it rest for just a few minutes. So what I like to do is I like to set a 15-minute timer, because that's really all the dough needs to rest. And now would be a good time to turn your oven on to 350 degrees and make sure there's a rack in the center. So we're gonna let our dough rest and we're gonna work on our filling once again. So this is my block of 1 pound of feta. I bought mine in block form because I really like the quality of cheese. And then I just crumble it myself into a bowl. Now, of course, you can buy crumbled feta too. That's also fine. And then what you want to do is bring over your squeezed spinach, and you're going to add this delicious crumbled feta right on top. And then you want to add your shredded Parmesan cheese right on top of that. I like to use shredded Parmesan that I already buy shredded, but of course you can grate your own. What I wouldn't use is the powder form of Parmesan. I really like a finely shredded Parmesan cheese for this filling. So then just grab a spoon and give your mixture a really good mix. You're just trying to bring these ingredients together and just distribute those cheeses amongst the spinach so that they're well distributed, and so that when you cut into your tapada and when you bite into your tapada, you get a nice proportion, a nice distribution of spinach to cheese. So you want to make sure to use the side of your spoon and just break up any little clumps of spinach or blocks of cheese. If there's any piece of feta that seems a little too large, then just use the side of your spoon and just break it up as you mix. Now, once your cheeses are well incorporated, what you want to do is grab 6 eggs, and then you want to crack them into a bowl, and then you want to use a fork to beat those eggs really well. Then once your eggs are well beaten, you just want to add them into your spinach and cheese mixture. And then you just want to use your spoon and combine the eggs with the spinach and cheese. Now, if you've seen me cook before, you know that there is nothing like mixing with your hands. I wash my hands constantly as I am cooking because really your hands are your best tool. So I start with my spoon, and of course I just mix my eggs in and I just try to incorporate the ingredients well. But at one point you're going to realize that your spoon isn't good enough. You really need to put your hands into this mixture. So of course your hands are well washed, and then you just come in and just go to the bottom of the bowl and then just mix this delicious spinach and cheese and egg filling together with your hands, and you will realize that it is much easier to distribute all that yummy goodness and make sure that it's nicely well distributed. And of course, if you find little chunks that are a little too large, you can just break them up. You're never going to feel that if you're doing it with a spoon. You're really only going to be able to nicely incorporate all these ingredients and just feel if there's any pieces that feel a little too large. You're only going to be able to do that if using your hands. Now, once all of your ingredients have been incorporated, it's been about 15 minutes, and so I wash my hands again And now I am ready to work on my dough. My dough has had a chance to rest for a bit, and it's going to make it just so beautiful to work with. So what I like to do is I like to grab a knife, and right there inside my bowl, I just cut my dough down the middle to make 2 portions of dough. One for the bottom crust of my tapada de espinaca y queso, and one for the top crust. You don't need to go fancy, you don't need to weigh it, but of course, if you're one of those people that wants it to be exactly the same, then of course you can weigh the dough and then split it in 2. But really it works super well if you just eyeball it and just cut it right down the middle. So then what I like to do is I like to cut a nice long piece of wax paper to roll out my dough, because working with this dough on wax paper is amazing. It doesn't stick, and it really helps you transfer the dough onto your Pyrex, and it's just a great way to work this dough. So what I do is, since I'm going to be making a rectangle, I just kind of make a bit of a rectangle out of the piece of dough, just very roughly. And then I grab another piece of long wax paper, and I'm going to place that right on top of the dough, because that way the dough doesn't stick to the rolling pin, and it just makes it really easy to work with. Now, this dough is extremely forgiving, and it's really just my favorite dough to work with because it is just so easy to stretch. Like, I could really just stretch the whole dough out by hand. Just using my hands, I could just smooth out the dough, especially when I'm using that wax paper. It really helps me. And of course, the rolling pin will help me stretch the dough out so that I make it large enough to cover the bottom, and then after that, the top of my tapada. So what you do is just use your rolling pin and just stretch your dough out, and then turn your wax paper as needed, or move it in whatever direction you feel you need to, and then just roll one way and roll the other way. And what you're trying to do is make a rough rectangular shape to be able to line the bottom of your baking dish. Now, if you're having a hard time making a rectangle, then just uncover the dough and then use your hand to kind of push the dough in the direction you want it to go. As I said, this dough is super easy to work with. It's very forgiving, and it really just allows you to pull it in whatever direction you need. So using your hands really helps. So just uncover it and then just help yourself make it into a bit of a rough rectangular shape. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what you want to do is roughly make it into a rectangle. And what I do after I feel that I've made it large enough and that it is somewhat of a rectangular shape is I bring over my baking dish, because what I want to do is confirm that my dough is large enough to cover the bottom and the sides of my rectangular baking dish. So you'll notice this dough is really supple, and it's really just beautiful to work with. And you're going to see in a moment how easy it is to cover those sides of your baking dish. But what I like to do first is I give it a nice spray of nonstick cooking spray, because that way when I'm ready to cut my tapada, my pieces will come out beautifully and whole, and it'll be absolutely perfect. So just peel the top layer off of that wax paper from our dough. And what we do is we bring that dough over onto our baking dish, and we're going to just use that other bottom layer of wax paper and then just fold over the dough right on top of our baking dish. And then we can just peel off that lower layer of wax paper. It's absolutely perfect, and it really just helps bring that dough over. And of course, it helped the dough not stick to our counter. And then what I do is with my fingers, I just gently take the dough and just make it work its way up the sides of my baking dish. You can just gently stretch it and bring it up on all sides, and you will see how easily this dough works beautifully to cover the inside of your baking dish. And just do the same thing all around. Just go on all 4 sides of your baking dish and use your fingers to just gently stretch that dough up the sides to cover the entire pan. So once the bottom of your baking dish is completely covered in dough, then just grab a fork and you're going to prick the dough all over. Just randomly go around and just pinch it with a fork and do it on the bottom and on the sides of your baking dish. This will keep your bottom dough nice and flaky and delicious. So now bring over your delicious spinach and cheese filling that has been anxiously waiting to go into the tapada de espinaca y queso, and then just use a spoon and just completely pour it out into that layer of dough that we have just lined our dish with. And then just use your spoon to help you distribute the filling amongst the entire baking dish. Just use the side of the spoon and help the spinach and the cheese just spread out so that you have somewhat of an even layer of spinach and cheese throughout your entire tapada de espinaca y queso. Don't press it down tightly, just kind of use your spoon to just loosen up that filling, and then just make sure you have a nice, pretty even layer of spinach and cheese filling running throughout your entire tapada de espinaca y queso. Now set your baking dish aside for a moment, and as expected, we are going to roll out our top layer of dough to cover our tapada de espinaca y queso. Tapada actually means covered. So if we don't put on a top layer, it would technically be destapada, which means uncovered. And in my family, we sometimes do a tapada destapada, which just has a bottom layer of dough and not a top layer of dough. So we actually call it a uncovered covered, which is kind of silly, but it's just a thing we do in my family. But the best way to do it is with a top cover. Hence the name tapada, covered. So what we do is I'm using the same wax paper that I used a moment ago because it's still good and I can still get some life out of it. And I'm gonna do the same exact process. I'm gonna roll out my dough and stretch it out as large as I can to be able to cover the top of my baking dish. I wanna make it somewhat rectangular so that I'm able to cover the entire baking dish with my delicious layer of dough. And just like I did earlier, I peel off that top layer of wax paper, and then I bring my baking dish close by and I use the wax paper to help me flip the dough onto my tapada and then just peel off the wax paper from the dough. And now my tapada is covered as it should be. It is an official tapada. So what I do is I use my hands and I just press my dough down onto the spinach, and then I take a knife and I just use it to trim off any extra dough that I have that comes over the sides of my baking dish, and that way I'll have a really beautiful cover for my tapada, and it'll be perfectly sized and it'll just make the perfect crust and the perfect dough cover for this delicious spinach and cheese borreca pie, my delicious tapada de espinaca y queso. So around here, nothing goes to waste. So I take these little scraps and I just roll them out and I make myself two little individual handheld pies, little borrequitas, little borrecas, and I fill them in with whatever I have at home. Sometimes I have some leftover ground beef or some cheese or some mashed potato, which I can combine with cheese, or even a little piece of guava with some cheese or without cheese, and I just make myself a couple of little borrecas. I am not gonna let that little bit of dough go to waste. And you could also use it to make a little design to put on top of your tapada if you want to. So definitely take advantage of that little piece of dough that is left over. So as you see, I just go around the entire baking dish with my hand and I just finish off that dough and just make it look pretty around the edges so that it just has a really nice finish to it once it is baked. And now I grab a knife and I just cut a few slits into this top dough as vents so that when my tapada de espinaca y queso bakes, it has a way to release some steam as it is baking. And that way, my top layer of dough is not going to balloon up and it's just going to lie flat and beautiful on top of my beautiful spinach and cheese borreca pie. And so you can cut this any way you want. There's no specific way to cut these vents. I just make a little pattern, and that way my tapada de espinaca y queso releases steam as it bakes, and it still looks absolutely beautiful. And sometimes, like I said, I take a piece of dough and I make a little decorative design right in the center of my tapada based on the occasion or the time of year, or if I'm making it for a special holiday, you can make a little design right in the center. And now grab your bowl with your egg. And what you want to do is you want to beat it and add a touch of water to it, because what we're going to do is we're going to do an egg wash for our entire tapada de espinaca y queso, because when it bakes, it's going to get a beautiful golden color, because this egg wash will help that top layer of dough develop a really beautiful color, and it's going to be flaky and absolutely delicious. So make sure you give it a nice egg wash all around that top layer of dough. And what I like to do for good measure after I give it that nice egg wash is I take my knife and I once again just run it right over the slits that I created earlier, because sometimes that egg wash will just clog those vents. And this way I want to make sure that when my tapada de espinaca y queso bakes, it has a way to release some steam. So just take your knife and run it right on top of those vents that you had created earlier, just to make sure that they're not clogged up with your egg wash. Now place your beautiful tapada on a center rack in your oven and set a 40-minute timer to allow your tapada to bake. And after 40 minutes, carefully pull your tapada out using some oven mitts, and it is absolutely gorgeous and it is smelling incredible. The scents are unbelievable. That spinach and cheese filling and that delicious flaky dough smells so great. Your entire house will be filled with an aroma like nothing you've ever experienced, and everyone is going to want to run to the kitchen to have a piece of this beautiful spinach and cheese borreca pie. It is really lovely and flaky and just absolutely special, and it's really something that is going to impress your family or your guests. It's really something you really must try. So I've let my tapada rest for about 5 minutes or so, and then I'm just going to cut right into it. You can cut it however you like. I like to cut it into squares so that I can serve these delicious pieces of tapada, and really, no matter how you cut it, it is so spectacular. I just cannot wait to grab a piece and try it myself. So what I'm going to do is I cut it across, and then I just come and cut it down in the other direction, and that way I make wonderful squares of this yummy spinach and cheese borreca pie, or my tapada de espinaca y queso, and it is going to be divine. So now, lucky me, I get to serve myself a piece and try it. And as you see, it holds up beautifully when we pull it out of the baking dish. It's absolutely perfect with that delicious spinach and cheese filling, and that crust is perfect. It holds up beautifully and it doesn't stick to the pan, and it's just absolutely fragrant and delicious, and I just cannot wait to taste it. This is really going to be a classic recipe that you're going to want to hold on to for years to come, because everyone is going to love it, and it is just so spectacular and just something really impressive, and it's really not that difficult to put together. Do not be intimidated by it, because the dough comes together so quickly and it's so beautiful, and that combination of cheese with spinach, and look at how beautiful and flaky that crust is. It's just light and delicious. I just cannot wait to take a bite. So lucky me, I get to sample it. I'm going to cut a little piece for myself, and I am going to really, really enjoy this. This is really so yummy. It's really one of my favorites. I cannot wait. Amazing. Wow. It's so delicious. It's just absolutely spectacular. It's just like my grandmother used to make and like my mom makes. It's just so perfect. It's got that incredible spinach and cheese filling, and it's got that delicious flaky crust, and the crust stays flaky on the top and on the bottom. It's just so divine, and it's just absolutely perfect. The texture, oh wow. This is so incredible. It is just so yummy. There isn't anyone who's not gonna like this recipe. It's just something that you cannot go wrong with. It's delicious, and it's just beautiful, and it's just absolutely perfect. This is really a spectacular dish. So how incredibly delicious does this look? It is so good. The dough turns into this incredibly flaky pastry, and the filling with that spinach and feta and Parmesan cheese and just the right amount of egg is perfect. It's the perfect complement to that incredibly flaky dough, and it is just absolutely delicious. There aren't enough words to describe how yummy this is. It's just the right amount of saltiness with the perfect contrast in textures. It is divine. You are going to love it. Trust me. No, better yet, don't trust me. You're going to have to try to make this recipe yourself. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's recipe, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Sharing my video really helps, so I really appreciate when you do it. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and to touch that little notification bell so that you don't miss out on any amazing upcoming recipes that I have planned. It's free and the benefits are endless. I'm going to be making a lot of yummy recipes and have already made others that you are going to love. So make sure not to miss them. And if you're not already following Sally That Girl in the Kitchen on social media, make sure you follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, and as Sally That Girl FL on Twitter, Snapchat, and TikTok. See you next time. Sally That Girl in the Kitchen.